All right, how's everybody doing tonight? We're going to go get started. Week 2, camera history, we're going to go over tonight and look at some history of cameras, some basic terminology with cameras. And week 3, looking ahead, we're going to cover next week settings and contrast. Week 4, you'll learn how to create a contact sheet and use the ISO setting on your camera. Week 5, exposure. And week 6, white balance. So just looking ahead a little bit. I believe I told you last week to make sure and bring your camera to class each session. Have it with you. Tonight's take home, you'll be working together in groups of 2 to 3 to 4 folks as you leave to get to know one another, and then also take each other's photo real quick before you leave. So let's go ahead and look in week 2. Past week 2 notes. On the take home, you will be practicing at least 10 photos per person in a group of 2 to 4 people. I'll have you select those folks in just a second. Put your camera mode in auto mode, which I'll come around to make sure everybody knows what the auto mode is on your camera. It's the basic mode out of the box, though, of your cameras. You'll press the button halfway down to focus before you press it all the way down. You'll have your classmate choose the photo they like. So as you leave tonight with your group, you can take a photo outside. It'll still hopefully be a little light. Take a photo outside somewhere, maybe, or out in the foyer. Say you get you and 2 other people. You'll take each other's photo, and then I want you to pick a photo from the other person's camera, the one you like. They're going to delete the other ones that you don't like. And then basically what you're going to do is name the photo just as for your own purpose. And most of you have phones, so what you might do is double duty. If you have your camera with you and your phone camera, you can take a picture with your camera, a picture with your phone, and then text yourself that person's name. If you want, you can have them type their name in there so you'll get the spelling right. So when you get home, you'll know the person you took the photo of, what their name was, what their face looked like. Because what you're going to have to do is when you upload, say you're in a group of 3 people, you're going to upload 2 photos to the photo album in week 1 of Foki, which I'll show you how to do in just a second. And you'll type in a message done when you upload it to week 2 album in Foki. And that's about it. So let me show you here real quick. And what I mean by done is just in this assignment area for the in-class take-home, you're going to submit the word done at the bottom where it says reply, and I know that you've submitted it into your conference in Foki. So let me show you real quick on Foki how to do it. I already have a podcast out there, but I'll do it real quick here and log in. So I'm going to go to Foki.com. I'm going to log into my Foki account and show you how to create folders within Foki for the class. I believe most everybody got a Foki website created, an account, and sent me your URL already. So Foki allows you to create 2 types of places to put a photo, or photos plural. One is a folder, the second is an album. What I suggest is, on the left side of Foki, they've got a whole bunch of different jumping points here. You've got welcome, about me, my Foki feed, albums, my web videos, guest book, journal, forums, faves, friends, guest book, and shopping cart. If you click on my albums in Foki, it's going to bring you to a view to show you all of your photos. If it's a brand new account, you're not going to have any albums to show. Let me click on this to show you here. And then it's going to show you your photo albums or your folders. So on the left side here, I can create a new album or I can create a new folder. What I suggest to do is for each week just to create a new folder. And so we'll go in here and do like week 1, Web225, just create it. And then within each week, as soon as you create a folder, it's going to say create a new album. There's not anything in there. You'll create a new album. Just do week 1 again is fine. Create it. And then here's where you're going to upload your photos. You can drag and drop them, or you can use the other uploaders. The other uploaders, if you do use them, the one I recommend is a simple, folky Java uploader. That's going to be the easiest one for everybody to use with less complications. They do have a Droid app. They do have an iOS app. They both work. But if you're doing it from your laptop or desktop at home, this simple, folky Java uploader works really good. Okay, so again, from your home, your My Albums actually, you're going to create a new folder. Once you create a new folder, within the folder, you will create the album and upload your photos. So questions on how to create a week-by-week folder and album. All right, great. So that's what we're going to do for your take-home. And that's it for week 2. So let me go ahead and go into the discussion part, because we're going to go over camera history tonight and a little bit about why you're here and some terminologies that have to do with digital photography. So we're going to look at tonight just an introduction to digital photography, an overview of camera technology, basic photographic techniques that you need to know. So first of all, some terminologies. You've heard some of these words maybe: DSLR, megapixel, image stabilization, dust reduction, live view, sensor, facial recognition. Heard of those before anywhere during your time with your cameras? What does it all mean, and why do I care? Why does it matter to me? Why does it matter to you? Well, hopefully that's why you're here this semester, is to kind of figure out what all this means and how you can use it. There's different types of classifications for cameras. The first is point and shoot, which is the kind of entry-level cameras. Prosumer is the next, mid-range, and then DSLR, digital camera. Okay, all three. As you go up in the spectrum, the price also goes up. Okay, and we'll talk tonight about what the differences are between these cameras, because a lot of them might have the same megapixels possibly. Why are they more expensive? And we'll find out why they are tonight. So point and shoot, commonly referred to as consumer digital cameras, represent about 90% of everybody in the world that has a camera and market. Best Buy, Walmart, your camera shops mainly sell these to most consumers. And they work great for most photos that people take today that they post on Facebook, Twitter, Vokey, and 4x6 printouts work great. Typically very small, compact, and lightweight. We've all seen the commercial with Ashton Kutcher and you know, the little small Canons and you know the small point and shoots that are very powerful but very compact. Targeted to a broad majority, typically very user-friendly. Image quality has improved drastically over the years. I started with film cameras myself, an old Brownie camera, and then went from that to 35 millimeter, and then when digital came out, went to digital. When I was going to school in my master's, they just started the digital camera craze. It just started going, and so I switched around then. And so prosumer is the mid-range, not technically its own specification. They are commonly term used to describe an advanced point and shoot, now used to describe many entry-level DSLRs. Very similar in shape and size. Typically, these have an extended zoom on them that the point and shoots don't have. Point and shoots generally don't have a zoom, real, big zoom, just, 2 or 3 times zoom. That's about it. And point and shoots also have what's called a digital zoom, and this has a physical zoom. We'll talk the difference about that tonight, what that is. Typically, they combine user-friendly point and shoot with more advanced features, generally for point and shoot, zoom, and then also like macro and maybe some image stabilization that the point and shoots do not have. DSLR stands for single lens reflex. SLR stands for single lens reflex. They have a larger sensor, and kind of note that word sensor because we're going to be talking about that quite a bit tonight. And that really kind of differentiates cameras, is the sensor. It results, because of the larger sensor, in a greater image quality. And I guess that's the first thing I want to talk about real quick. Most students coming into the course think a camera with higher megapixels gives you better image quality. And that's true in a sense, but the one thing that gives you the best image quality, or really denotes the image quality and attributes to it, is the sensor within the camera that you really don't hear advertised much on the market. You hear megapixels, but you really don't hear about sensor. The sensor, though, is what makes or breaks a high quality image. It also is the part of the camera that makes it cost more. The higher quality sensor, the more expensive the camera is. You could say the sensor is the brains of the camera. It's the computational, programmable brains of that camera that does all of the bells and whistles to make sure that that picture looks the best that it can. It's tend to favor on the SLR manual control, lacking settings may be found on point and shoot, the SLR. So as you get to the SLR, higher, larger sensor, more expensive, more complex, but less auto control and more manual control. Much heavier and larger, and ability to interchange lenses. Some of these lenses in this DSLR type of camera can cost in the thousands just for a lens. Generally, makes sense that these are targeted towards commercial photographers that do this for a living. Whether it be real estate photography, whether it be fashion photography, whatever it might be, movie set photography. These are high-end cameras to get high-quality photos, so they're going to be high dollar when it comes to photography. Underwater photography is another one you might have heard of. So what's the real difference between a digital SLR and a point-and-shoot camera? I'm glad you asked. Thank you for asking. But the only difference is what you think. What's the big difference from what we've said so far? What do you think it is? Yeah. Is it the megapixel or is it the sensor, you think? How many thinks it's a sensor? You guess. There you go. Great. That's a correct answer. The real difference is the sensor, but what makes or breaks the different cameras is the image quality, which is a byproduct of a high quality sensor. So you can have like a 6 megapixel DSLR. How can that take a better picture than a 10 megapixel point and shoot? The sensor. The sensor is going to make or break that camera. So how it works is this. Each digital image is made up of millions of tiny squares that you don't really see on a monitor in a native 100% view or when you print it out. Okay? They're known as pixels. Essentially, an image is recorded by tiny micro lenses or pixels, which is made up by the camera sensor. So we have a deer. Take that ear of the deer and blow it up, and that's what it looks like. And so it blows up that image, and now you can see the actual squares and the colors of each square, and those squares are called pixel. And you probably downloaded pictures from the web, or you've taken pictures, you've blown up and seen these. You just maybe didn't know what they were, and that's what they are. And the more megapixels you get in a square inch, it makes sense, and the quality of those pixels, it makes sense it's going to be a higher quality image. Now, I told you earlier, when I started in photography, it was film and then went to digital. I was also a graphic designer, and so I worked closely with print shop folks that worked in a print shop. And I would put together layouts for a design on a magazine, give it to the print shop folks on film. They would take that film and then transfer it to big drums out in the print shop that would print certain colors, usually a 4-color printout. You had, cyan, yellow, magenta, and black, and you would print these out. Each drum had a different print color, and it would print those colors according to whatever it needed for the photo or the text. The reason I mentioned that was you really could tell a difference back then on quality of photos, because when it went to print, if it was a low-res image, it would look like that, very pixelated. You might not even see it on the film. You wouldn't catch it to that first printout, because printers always, and they still do it today in magazines, managers get mock-ups of the layout before it goes to print. On every page, you have to OK every page, OK every image, OK every article, and that's part of what I did. And if you had a photographer that took a photo that looked pretty good when I pasted it and put it in the layout, I wouldn't actually notice it till it went to print sometimes. And then the photographer would have to go and retake that photo and give it back so we could put it in the article. Today, all you have to do is delete the image from your camera and take another image, take another photo. Back then, the photographer would have to buy a new roll of film, take the photo, take it to get developed. Sometimes he'd do it himself or she'd do it herself. That might take a day, day and a half to happen. And then I would finally get the film back from the photographer. Today, you can email your digital images. Folks in the field can do it for both magazine, newspaper, whatever. In fact, some of your SD cards actually have built-in Wi-Fi for your cameras. So what that means is you can buy them. They're about $80. You can buy an SD card that plugs into your camera. You walk into your house or into your place of work or any Wi-Fi area. It automatically recognizes it's in Wi-Fi, connects to it, and uploads your images to your server. And you can do that to any camera today. Pretty much it's a digital camera. So I've come from the print shop days to what we have today. And one of the big differences, though, from then and now is just the speed of that transfer happening. Where it used to take a day or day and a half for an image to come back, it takes literally minutes. Somebody can retake a photo and send it to me. The pixels are a big part of it. Pixels are not created equal. All pixels are not created equal. A digital sensor is essentially made up of millions of tiny micro lenses built into the sensor. And those tiny micro lenses are pixels, actually on the chip itself. Pixels are analog devices which record light and color. The larger sensors contain larger pixels, which are much better at collecting data. So, here's an SLR sensor blown up. Here's a regular compact point and shoot. On a point and shoot, same color range, but smaller pixels, smaller amount of light, smaller amount of color, not as rich. So when you get to SLR, higher range of colors, bigger pixels, dumping more data in each pixel, more colors in each pixel. And so basically more bang for your buck when it comes to pixels being created. And generally you don't see it if you're doing digital photo camera to uploading to Facebook or Twitter. You're not going to really see it. You only see the low pixelization take place when you print that photo out. Okay, and so most users, though, today don't print out photos, right? We don't. We mainly take our photos and email them to each other, or we put them on Facebook, put them on Twitter, put them on LinkedIn, put them on Instagram, and so you don't see that pixelization. So digital sensors compared, here's some examples. Okay, I told you 35 millimeter film. That's basically where the comparable quality of a 35 millimeter is way out here as far as digital sensor goes. Here we are with a Canon EOS 10D 300D, which is a fairly high-end DSLR. We're about 75% of where we used to be with 35 millimeter film as far as quality goes. But because we're in a digital age, the only folks that need cameras to have high quality pixels and high quality images are those in the professional field that do magazines still, newspaper. But most users, this range here and below is fine because you're not dealing with print, okay? You're dealing with monitors, you're dealing with websites. So we're getting there, but we're not quite there when it comes to digital. There's still a little gap here between the digital and 35 millimeter. Full frame versus APS-C size frame sensor. What this means is 35 millimeter is the frame outside of the gray area. So basically, what I was used to taking with 35 millimeter on a frame, this part here, all the way out, around. Today, the largest spectrum for most cameras is the kind of grayed in area of what you're allowed to take. And the sensor is what allows you, doesn't allow you to take it, not really the zoom has nothing to do with it, or the LCD viewer, the viewer has nothing to do with it. It has to do with the sensor in the camera itself, technology of it. So digital camera features and technologies going on. Megapixels determines the total size of the image recorded by the camera. The more megapixels does not necessarily mean a better picture. Digital image dimensions do not equally print dimensions. Okay? For example, a full quality image from an 8 megapixel camera will produce a digital image measuring roughly 9 by 14 inches. But printing standards say you should not print photo quality any larger than an 8 by 10. Okay? And most consumers never print above an 8 by 10. That's max. Most consumers print in what frame size you think, and what print size do you think? You guys do it, right? When you do print, what size do you print? Just take a guess. What most consumers print if they do go to Walgreens or Walmart? 8.5 by 11? Yep. I'm talking photo prints. If you say you're on an outing and you go to print these out at Walgreens or Menards, or not Menards, or Woodman's or wherever, what do you think the number one print size is for consumers? 5 by 7 is a popular one. A little lower. 4 by 6, exactly. 4 by 6 is the number one print size in the world for consumers, because some people still do photo albums. Not very many, but there are still some around that still do photo albums. But when they do photo albums, or they have a wedding and people want to print stuff out, the majority size is 4 by 6, and second's 5 by 7, third 8 by 10, in that order. So megapixel doesn't necessarily mean quality. We've learned that. Digital image, though, is in direct juxtaposition to the image quality of the sensor, to the high quality of that sensor itself. So if we have a graph here of megapixels versus print size, on the upper left corner, we're starting with 0, 0, and the bottom right corner going all the way to 44. And what this is dealing with is megapixels versus print size. And so basically, the higher megapixels you have determines the size of print that you can have. All right, so we have 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 16, 20, 24, 30, 36, and 44 megapixels. The 44 megapixels roughly can print a 27 by 18 print size. Okay, 4 by 6 really only needs roughly 3 or 4 to 6 megapixel, and that's it. And most of your cameras today have anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20 megapixels. So for 4 by 6, all point and shoots and up have plenty of megapixels to print those 4 by 6 at pretty good quality. So let's look at movement compensation. This is we'll hear some words what this means in different platforms, depending on the camera you have. It basically just refers to camera's ability to correct very small movements by the user while taking a picture. Does anybody have anybody in your family or you yourself cannot hold still when somebody's taking your picture? Anybody? Any little kids, grandkids, kids, relatives, that regardless what the shot is, they cannot hold still. Okay, that's fine. If you're that, that's great. Because cable or camera stabilization now allows it to where if there is small movement, it'll correct it. Meaning, if they're going like this, it'll stop it and won't have that blur with that because of the shake of the person or the shake of the person holding the camera. Some of our hands, depending on how much coffee we've had, might shake a little bit when we take a photo, and that's normal. Camera stabilization will help in that as well. It's very useful also in low light situations, because if you're outside and the sun's getting ready to set, the camera will have to work extra hard to take a good photo, and it looks at every little movement, the lower the light. And that's the more stable you have to have a camera, the darker the darker it is outside. So very useful in low light, very useful in small movements. Here is some terminologies by different companies for camera stabilization, movement stabilization. Nikon, vibration reduction. Canon, image stabilization. Pentax, shake reduction. Sony, super steady shot. But it's all meaning the same, movement compensation. And all of your cameras have it, by the way, regardless if it's point and shoot, all the way up to upper DSLR range has this on your camera. Next is dust reduction. Dust reduction is more prevalent in DSLRs due to the constant changing of lenses. A friend of mine does a lot of underwater photography, and so he probably has 4 or 5 different underwater lenses. So he not only has a dust issue, but he also has sometimes condensation issue as well between the lens of the camera and where he screws it into the DSLR. But dust is a problem with DSLRs because of the removable lenses. Once dust gets into your sensor, it can be near difficult or impossible to remove. Dust reduction is essentially a mechanism which shakes the camera's sensor to free any clinging dust particles. In fact, some of your cameras will do this even on the mid-range. When it starts up, you'll hear it vibrate a little bit or feel it vibrate a little bit. Some of that is the zoom doing this type of thing, adjusting, but then some of it's also the dust reduction shaking off the sensor a little bit and make just a little amount of vibration to get some dust if there is any on the sensor. Special anti-static coating or filters may also be used on the coating of the sensor to lessen the dust. Now, most of your cameras have this called live view. Live view is basically referring to the ability to use your LCD screen on your camera the same way you'd use a viewfinder. Shots can be composed while even holding the camera up in the air if you're in a concert, which we've all done, to take a photo looking at the LCD view. Originally, this was only found in point and shoots, but now all DSLRs for the most part have live view. A note, a point of reference to you to help you with battery usage and battery consumption is to make sure that you use the LCD viewer sparingly when you're taking photos, because it does use more power in your battery and sucks it dry a lot quicker. If you are going to use a live view a lot, buy an extra battery or two for your camera. Okay? If you don't like to use the LCD viewer, the viewfinder, buy an extra battery or two. They're generally fairly inexpensive. But if you have, up to this point, used the live view on your camera for the most part, I'd like you to practice for the next few weeks to use only the viewfinder on your camera that all your cameras have, which will take a little practice and take a little bit of getting used to it. Now, granted, if you're trying to get a shot, like I said earlier, and you're in a concert or something like that, you can still use your LCD viewer, for sure, that's what it's for. But general shots where your camera's literally in front of your face anyway, I suggest using the viewfinder to save battery. Also, with the camera up to your eye, it's been proven that most people can keep the camera a little bit more steady and focused if your eye's looking through the viewfinder versus the LCD viewer. Facial recognition. Most cameras today detect faces in the frame based on color, contrast change, etc. In fact, some of your cameras, when they have by default out of the box an auto setting, like we're going to use this week, if you have two people in your group tonight, it'll literally put a green box around both faces, right? Or a blue box or a brown, whatever box it is your camera uses. It's recognizing the faces that's in the shot. If those faces move, the boxes move. It's recognizing the face. And what it uses to recognize the face, by the way, is your eye sockets and your nose and your mouth. Those points, eye, nose, and mouth, to determine if it's a face or not. Color and contrast are automatically adjusted to pleasing skin tones with facial recognition. So if it's kind of dark around the area that you're taking a photo, like in here, fluorescence is terrible to take photos in. If you were to take a photo of each other in here in auto mode and your camera had facial recognition, it would automatically accentuate your skin color and add some contrast to it and kind of forget about everything out here. It would kind of lighten up your skin a little bit. And facial recognition, great technology over the years in digital that we did not have at all in 35 millimeter days. Didn't happen. Didn't have that. So there's a lot of benefits to digital cameras. So how do you get a good shot? Glad you asked. You guys are very talkative tonight. How do you get a good shot? Well, one of the first things you want to do, there's hundreds of different tips and tricks that you can learn. I'll tell you what I know, what I've learned over the years this semester, which can make for a good photo. It's a relative term, and you kind of already know that maybe, because like the first week assignment where you guys chose a photo and uploaded it, and I told you don't really worry about why you chose it. Just kind of upload it and say, I like this. This is cool. I like this photo. They're all different. Everybody's photos in here is different. There wasn't a pattern at all to the photos that were uploaded. What that tells you is everybody has different points of view, different likings, different taste, right? Some of you are very conservative. Some of you are very liberal. Some of you like to stay up late. Some of you like to get up real early. Some of you like pizza. Some of you hate pizza, right? And so everybody's different, even when it comes to photography and looking at photos. But everybody wants to take a good photo, regardless where you come from, what spectrum you are at, what your belief system is. Everybody wants to take a good photo. It's a relative term. What's good to one person may not be good to somebody else. But for our purposes, we will refer to good in the sense of correct exposure. Okay? Correct exposure of that person, object, whatever, sunset, sunrise, mountain, water, stream, insect, child, adult, grandma, grandpa, making sure that that photo is the best exposure, correct exposure, to make it good. So exposure is basically a correct or good exposure occurs when you maintain as much detail as possible with both the very bright parts called the highlights or the very dark parts called the shadow. Now, how many is familiar with Photoshop in here? I know there's some Photoshop people. Okay. In Photoshop, you already know about highlights and shadows. Highlights and shadows are used a lot in photo rendering. When you do levels, you can do highlights and shadows. And what you want to do basically is every photo that you take has bright parts. It might not be that bright, but it has some bright parts. And they also have dark parts or the shadow parts. You want to make sure that your photo is as real as possible, in the most real light as possible, and when you take it. Because you really only have the best photo is when you take it. What I mean by that is I've been post-production for a lot of years and being a graphic designer, love Photoshop, love everything about post-production. But if I have a photo that's terrible exposure, I'm talking really bad exposure, there's only so much I can do with that in post-production. Really only so much. I can't fix it if it's really god-awful exposure. If it's a little bad exposure, I can probably fix it. Red eye, I can fix it. Blemishes, I can fix it. any photo manipulation I need to do, I can generally do that. But if it's a really terrible exposure, meaning the highlights are terrible, the low lights are terrible, the shadows are terrible, I can only do so much. How much of a range in which you can capture detail from light to dark is referred to as dynamic range. As you're about to see, there's many correct or good exposures, and there's 3 factors when referring to exposure when you're taking photos. And you're going to learn all 3 this semester and play with them all 3 this semester. 1 is shutter speed, 2 is aperture, and 3 is ISO. So shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Shutter speed, aperture, ISO. It's the 3 legs of the stool for a good exposure on a photo. If you know how to do and utilize shutter speed and utilize aperture and utilize ISO, you're going to learn how to take a photo the best exposure possible. So shutter speed. This refers to how long the shutter's open, exposing the image sensor to light. It's how long the camera sees the picture and then shuts down. It's like if you were to open your eyes right now and look at something and shut them. That's shutter speed. Okay? It's measured in seconds from 30 to 1/8,000th of a second. All right? And so basically you've got a window to open up. And, you know, a lot of times that window in a shutter speed, or the shutter itself, it's going to open up briefly, and then it's going to close altogether, and close out. And so the speed of that, one part of the leg of the exposure, is important to know how to use. And it is, and you'll learn this semester, different shutter speeds are good for different lighting that you're in. So here we have an example of shutter speed 600 and up, is used generally for stop motion and will freeze the subject in air or in the water. And we've all seen it in a lot of movies, stop motion, the Matrix type of shots, fight scenes, kids jumping in midair, acrobatics in the water. So literally when you take the photo, the shutter speed's so fast it can capture the moment in time when those kids are jumping, even though their arms are moving, their legs are moving, their hair is moving, their head's moving, their shirts are moving, it stops it. It freezes it. So it takes a fast shutter speed to do that, 600 and up. Same with water. You can literally see the splashes of water frozen in time with the shutter speed being set that high. Slow shutter speed does the opposite. We have on the left side a stream of water. Slow shutter speed actually adds movement to water even though it's not moving, because it's so slow that it literally portrays movement almost. Okay, it gives a feeling of movement. The guy's running, you see the shadow over time of movement, right? The foot a little forward, a little back, that whole time frame of however fast the shutter speed was, and this one is 1/60th or slower. And so you literally see movement. And some photos you're going to want to see movement. Some photos you're going to want to freeze time and freeze it in time. Some you're going to see movement in time. So literally, in a linear way, with a slow shutter speed, you can actually accentuate and give the feeling of movement, which is part of knowing exposure. Also, on a bridge, on an overpass, taking photos very, 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 very slow, 5 seconds or slower, can be used in very low light settings to obtain correct exposure or achieve dramatic, artistic effects, which looks pretty cool. I had a photographer come here a couple semesters ago that, you know, the wind farms down 3951, he set up a 24-hour feed, shutter speed. It was 12 hours. And when he got finished with it, it looked kind of like one of those brown popsicles that has a spiral in it. because it started literally in the morning and it ended at sunset. And so you kind of have the light, yellow and oranges, and then black towards the end. So it kind of looked like a big lollipop, using a slow shutter speed. Shutter speed, beware. As your shutter speed decreases, your chances of getting a blurry image increases because you must hold the camera steadier for slower shutter speeds. This is where the tripod comes in. When you play with slower shutter speeds, and we really don't get into slower shutter speeds this semester at all. The most we get into is when you're doing night shots and light. You're doing your panoramics and your landscapes. I recommend getting a tripod for that, and that's it. But slow, so 5 seconds and longer shutter speed we're not doing. But I say anything where you're having a darker night setting, or a slower shutter speed, you must always use either a tripod or make sure your camera's resting on a car hood, on your knee, something to where it has no movement. So first is shutter speed, next is aperture. Aperture is the second leg of a good exposure. It's defined as a hole or opening through which the light comes in. My awesome drawing over there of a shutter, in the middle of that drawing is a hole, all right? And that hole refers to aperture, how big the hole is. Shutter speed just determines how fast that hole opens and shuts. That's all it refers to. Aperture refers to how big the hole is. How big is the hole for your camera when you're taking a photo? And that's what aperture refers to. How much light is allowed in during the time the shutter's open. So inside the camera is a system of blades which open and close to increase or decrease the opening by which the light passes into the camera. And that's called aperture. Aperture is often referred to as an f-stop on your cameras. And apertures are represented by the letter F, and then generally in fraction or decimal. So 1.8 all the way up to 5.6, we'll say. The smaller number means a wider opening and is referring to a larger value. So a large aperture of 2.0, a small aperture, 22. So the higher the number, the smaller the opening. The smaller number, the higher the bigger the opening when it refers to aperture. The wider the lens is open, the larger the aperture value. The more the light gets in, then you would probably want to use a faster shutter speed because you're having more light come in, faster shutter speed. Less light come in, slower shutter speed. So here we have a screenshot of a camera with different f-stops, 2, 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, and 16. The F2, notice a large opening, 4, a little smaller, 8, a little smaller, and 16, very small. Depth of field. Aperture controls the depth of field, which refers to how your image is in focus. An example is I've taken a picture of you tonight, sitting where you're at, and blur out everybody else behind you. I'm going to be dealing with depth of field. Okay? Where I want to focus in on your face only, and everybody else behind you is blurred out. Everything. That's depth of field. Making sure my image is in focus, my object's in focus, everything else is blurred. So for this, a wide or a small number will give me a shallow depth of field and can be used to isolate the subject. So a wide aperture, meaning a smaller opening, meaning I'm focusing in. It's almost like you taking when you were a kid, how you take and do this with your fingers, right, and see somebody's head and go squish it. It's kind of like that with aperture. The whole is basically focusing in on the subject. Everything around it is going to be blurred out. Okay? So this hole here could be a crude example here of somebody's face right there. Small aperture. Everything else around that photo, because it's a small aperture, will be blurred out and give a higher depth of field. And really, that's the best way to explain, before 3D came in, the best way to give depth to any photo was to give it depth of field and a small aperture number, or small aperture hole to opening. Because basically what you're doing is you're giving depth to that photo by blurring out everything but the main subject in the photo. And depth of field allows you to do depth of aperture. So here's an example of a shallow and wide depth of field. So a shallow depth of field on the left is an f-stop 2.8. Notice the two twine balls of twine in the back are blurred out. And the first one is clear. On the right is a wide depth of field. The wide depth of field is an f32. Remember, the higher the number, the smaller the opening. Notice the depth of field here, or the blur is not there. They're all the same. It's all the same. No blur whatsoever, no depth of field. So a shallow depth of field, like an f2.8, which is going, remember, smaller f-stop gives a larger opening, larger f-stop gives a smaller opening. So with a 2.8, going to have a larger opening, shallower depth of field. Wide depth of field, 32, smaller opening. Wide depth of field, you're going to see everything. Not going to have real much depth at all on the one on the right. The one on the left is the one that most students coming into the class kind of want to learn how to do. And you'll learn how to do that this semester. You're doing the shallow, regardless of what the camera is you have, you'll learn how to do the shallow depth of field. Especially when we get into macro photography this semester, close-up photography, we'll teach you that as well. Then lastly, ISO. So we went over shutter, aperture, now ISO as the third leg. This refers to the light sensitivity of the sensor, the ISO does. High ISO means the sensor will be more sensitive to light, meaning it takes less light to get the right exposure. It's similar, high ISO is similar to film speed in 35 millimeter. So ISO on your cameras typically range from 100, some of your cameras might start at 80, most of yours are going from 100 to 1600. Newer cameras can go all the way up to 64,000. Using high ISO values causes the sensor to produce much more heat, which creates a digital noise. So if you have a higher ISO, it kind of makes it look kind of granular effect or noise effect into the image. Noise is similar to film grain. It causes loss of fine detail. It's more visible in dark parts of the image and is generally more noticeable when displayed on the screen than in print. I'm going to stop there for just a second. Many times this semester we don't print a lot in here, but when you see something on a screen, sometimes something on the screen actually can look worse than when it's printed. It can. And you actually don't see it until it's printed out. You might have had a picture maybe at times where when you did print it or got it printed for you at a print shop, you looked at it on your camera or on your computer and like, this looks terrible. And it was printed out, I was like, oh, that's pretty good. Looks pretty awesome, actually. The light's good, exposure's good. And the reason for that is a lot of times it's because the ISO on a display does not always come out right. The ISO does not always come out right on a display and monitor. Some cameras claim to have digital image stabilization, which we've already talked about. This just means a camera will automatically increase the ISO in order to allow fast shutter speed. Fast shutter speed will reduce the likelihood of camera shake, but high ISO can also cause a grainy type of image resulted in that. The fourth element is white balance. So white balance doesn't really affect your exposure. It just is the appearance of the colors in the image. Okay, an example is this. In order for me to see true blue on that board, I have to know true white. Knowing true white in any color spectrum gives you the true color, the true primary color. If you don't have true white in an image, when you're taking a photo. If the camera doesn't know what true white is, you and I know what true white is. Our eyes know what true white is because our eyes are actually better than any camera sensor. But your camera sensor does not always know what true white is. And you'll learn this semester, you can tell your sensor what true white is with white cards. You literally give the camera a white card and say, here's what white looks like. Now take the photo, and all the colors come out correctly. Because the sensor does not always know, like I said, what true white is. In fact, it never does. You have to tell it what true white is. You can fake true white, though. You can say, this is white, but it's really not white, to give kind of dramatic effects, which you'll find out how to do this semester. Like, say, you're on a beach and you're not tan like me. I'm not tan, but you want to be tan. You can do certain effects with white balance to make you look tan, even though you're not tan. And vice versa, you can give somebody that's tan look like a vampire if you put the correct white balance. So white balance is essential for light sources, knowing what the true colors are of the image. So to know true white or to know true blue, you have to know true white. True red, true white. Different light sources cast on colors. Like in here, your eye doesn't notice it, my eye doesn't notice it, but these fluorescent lights give off a different color than white. Okay? A lot of times these lights in here will give a kind of a bluish tint, all right, or a yellowish tint, depending on the fluorescent. But your eyes and my eyes, we adjust, right? They adjust. If I was to totally pitch dark this room for as much as I could, your eyes would adjust in seconds, right? You could see stuff, right? Cameras don't do that. Cameras don't adjust in seconds. Our eyes do, but cameras don't. And so that's where the light sources, you'll learn this semester, affect the outcome of a photo. So, because you and I can take a photo, right, with our camera, look through the viewfinder, go, looks good to me. We look at it when we print out, like, that is yellow. What is up with that? Well, it sees what we don't see. The camera does. The camera sees the hue of the light bulb, whatever it might be, or the car light, or the lamp light. When I grew up in the 80s in high school, all the homes had the old-fashioned incandescent bulbs, right? And a lot of people smoked in their house and smoked in the restaurants. And so you had, those bulbs would get off a yellowish tint. Smoke, by the way, in combination with those bulbs, gave even a more yellowish, bluish tint to your photos. And so a lot of photos you saw in the 70s and 80s actually have kind of that kind of yellowish tint to it. And a lot of that has to do with the incandescence. And also a lot of that has to do with smoking. Just people smoked all the time, everywhere. And so you didn't see it when you took the photo a lot of times, but it was there because our eyes adjust immediately. Now, white balance essentially to camera is essentially the camera compensating for the color cast of the light in order to reproduce the correct colors. So all of your cameras have white balance that you might have played with already, right? Sunny white balance, shady white balance, sunny bright, snow white balance, fireworks white balance, right? All these different white balances are supposed to compensate for what's going on around you at the time, all right? And make up for it and give you true colors. So fireworks white balance is supposed to give you the true colors of the fireworks as they go off in the sky. The color cast of a light is referred to as a temperature, rated in Kelvin. Now, when I mean temperature, it's not heat temperature. I guess it is a little bit, but you don't feel it. It's color temperature. Here's an example of something you might have seen, maybe. I know you might have seen in movies if you're not seeing it in person. Have you ever been a hot summer day and you've looked off on the road and it's looked a little blurry ahead? It's looked like just kind of like a little blurry just right above the concrete. You ever seen that before? Kind of just a little blurry. And that's the heat coming off of the actual pavement. All right, that's actually heat coming off the pavement. What this is referring to is these lights give off a certain heat. Okay? Now, granted, they're not going to be enough heat to where you can see them, but that heat generates a certain color. And it can be either cool color to a warm color. Most digital cameras have automatic white balance, which we'll play with this semester, but also you have option for different sources of light, like incandescent bulb, fluorescent light, LED lights, which have come out in a number of years, which are pretty cool. Fireplace light, light source, lamp light source, fireworks light source, lamp light source, a whole bunch of different light sources that some of your cameras will have as a white balance that you'll play with. And there's one of the labs we actually do as a take-home where you actually get to go to these different areas around town where it has this source of light, and you're going to use a correct white balance to match it, but then you're also going to use the incorrect just to see what it does effect-wise to your photos. And it does, and sometimes has some pretty cool effects by applying the wrong white balance to give a right result that you want for a photo. Basic in-camera settings. These are some, and if you would right now get your camera out, we're not going to actually go over yours one by one tonight, but I would like you to get your camera out to kind of look at yours, if you don't mind, while we're going over these different setting modes, which I know everybody in here has different mode settings. But here's some that you might have. There's several different modes which offer a combination of automatic and manual control over 3 elements of exposure we've talked about, shutter speed, ISO, and the white balance, and going through that and your f-stops. Auto also generally refers to, on most of your cameras, it might be the A for auto, possibly. Some of yours actually might have just a square for auto, possibly, or A for auto, or a green square, something like that. True point and shoot, where the camera decides all the settings for you. That's auto. That's what we're going to use this week. But then also you have other ones in here: manual, AV, TV, P, portrait, landscape, macro, sport, all these different types of other settings that your camera could have. AV is the aperture priority that allows you to choose the aperture value. Remember the f-stops, which the camera chooses. Then if you do AV priority, the camera will choose automatically the shutter speed for you. TV or shutter priority allows you to choose a shutter speed while the camera chooses the aperture for you to produce the correct exposure. M or manual gives you the complete manual control where you can choose in that control shutter speed and aperture in manual. You can't choose ISO in manual, but shutter speed and aperture you can choose. Some of your cameras might also have these, scene modes. Scene modes are basically fully automatic modes designed specifically for a certain situation. They typically place emphasis on one or more settings based on a typical circumstance or situation. Most digital cameras have very similar scene modes. So let's look at some of them. Backlit or backlight eliminates dark shadows and lights coming from behind a subject or when subjects in the shade. The built-in flash automatically fires to fill in the shadows. Beach or snow, photograph beach, snow, and sunlight water scenes. Exposure and white balance are set to prevent the scene from being washed out and looking washed out. Also on this one, using tripod is recommended. Fireworks, shutter speed and exposure set for shooting fireworks. Pre-focusing and using tripod recommended. In fact, when you switch yours to these settings like fireworks, a lot of times your camera will tell you, hey, by the way, you might want to use a tripod. Okay, it might actually just prompt you on that. Landscape takes photos of wide scenes. The camera automatically focuses on distant objects. Macro takes close-up shots of small objects, flowers and insects. The lens can be moved closer to the subject than in other modes. Hold the camera steady. In fact, in a macro mode, what you do, and you'll do this semester, instead of zooming, you basically, whatever your camera's set at normal zoom, we'll say 0 zoom, you physically take your camera in proximity to the object to take the photo in macro mode. Night portrait takes photos of a subject against the night scene. The built-in flash and red eye reduction are enabled. Shutter speeds are low, and use of tripod is recommended. Night scenes, photographing nightscapes, like say the Chicago skyline and Navy Pier at night, on a boat possibly would be an example. Pre-programmed to use slow shutter speeds, use of tripod recommended. Party scene, taking photos in a dim lit room. Exposure and shutter speed are automatically adjusted to room brightness, captures indoor backdoor lighting or background lighting and candlelight. Hold the camera very steady or use a tripod for this mode. Portrait. This is where the main subject is clearly focused and the background is out of focus, has less depth of field. We talked about earlier. Best when taking shots outside during the day. Shooting using a mid to low telephoto lens. Standing close to your subject within recommended camera range, and when possible, selecting an uncomplicated background that's far from the subject. Sports mode, also kids and pet modes maybe on some of your cameras. Taking photos of fast-moving subjects, fast shutter speeds, freezing the subject in action. Best when shots are taken in bright light outside, pre-focusing recommended. Anytime you see the word pre-focusing, that just means pushing the camera button halfway down on the shutter speed, on the shutter button, just pushing it halfway down and holding it. Most of your cameras, when you do that, will pre-focus. You'll actually see the zoom do one of these things, kind of go in and out, and kind of settle on what a good zoom at that time, and that's what pre-focus means. Sunset, taking photos at sunset and sunrises helps keep the deep hues of a scene. And then some of your cameras have metering modes. It's basically a metering system within the camera to determine the amount of light for different frames at the best exposure. Many cameras have this metering mode. And basically what it is this. You got your viewfinder, right? And your metering mode can be like this, multimeter mode, say 5 spots. And what it's going to do is focus, your sensor is going to focus on these 5 spots and zoom in. Everything else is going to be kind of not as focused from the standpoint of the sensor, and it's going to focus on that. That's multimetering mode. Then you could have single center metering mode. Centering meter mode is right in the middle, and you're just center metering mode that photo or that subject, isolating the camera sensor on that center area, and to evaluate it for color, best exposure, does it all for you on metering mode. So we talked about that. Centering mode is the most popular. Matrix is also called in some of yours, that first one I drew, multi-metering mode or matrix. Spot metering refers to just under 4% of the viewfinder area. Takes a precise exposure of only that area only and disregards everything else. So this is good when you're taking subjects that are maybe backlit or bright lit upon in a background that's dark, and where extremes and brightness are in a scene. Partial metering is basically taking around 15%, 13 to 15% of the viewfinder. It's good for underexposed areas, which you'll learn about this semester, what underexposure means. And for this one, you just need to know it gives a skilled photographer more control over exposure than matrix and center metering does, because you can tell it exactly where you want that dot to be on your viewfinder. Ending up here, before we depart with our group assignment, is when I was taking my master's in college, this had nothing to do with photography. Rule of thirds, though, came out in my design class. Because everything in creation and nature has kind of this going on. Kind of a third thing going on. Everything that you look at in nature, in your body, has this kind of rule of thirds thing going on. Basically what it is just imagine the frame divided into 3 equal parts, separated both horizontally and vertically, and then divide it into thirds. So basically you have like a tic-tac-toe type of thing going on on your LED or LCD viewfinder. The concept is this: placing your subject or elements along one of the lines, and especially on or near the intersecting points, like on the upper right, lower right quadrant of the screen that you'll look at in just a second. What it does, it makes your eye of the viewer focus towards that area. So here's an example of the 4 quadrants of the rule of thirds. When we first started taking photos, well, I mentioned this last week, we like to put everything in the center, right? It's just human nature. For some reason, we want to put everything in the center. When I give a kindergarten something to draw and give him crayons, he fills up the entire page of color. Okay? Just wants to fill the entire thing. It's human nature. But whenever you begin learning how to take photos, one of the first things you got to train your eye to do is to start placing subject of the photo in one of these 4 areas of the screen, one of these 4 areas of your viewfinder. And what it's going to do is it's going to lead the eye of the viewer to that area, and it's going to make it more natural looking photo. So when you notice magazine shots or you notice billboards, you'll notice a rule of thirds taking place. The main subject is going to be generally in one of these 4 areas. Generally for portraits, it's going to be on the upper 2 areas of the shot. They're generally not centered. They're a little off center, left or right. So here's the rule of thirds illustrated. We have a nice, beautiful sunset, the backdrop of some water, the tree with a little island in the middle. What's the focus point of this picture, you think? What is it? Yeah, the tree. The tree is the focus point. The photographer wants everybody to focus on that. You know, it's definitely beautiful sky, though, right? Beautiful water. But notice where the tree is located, kind of towards the lower right quadrant of the rule of thirds. And when you first look at this photo, your eye might naturally quote or go to the upper left corner of the sky, possibly, and then gradually come down to the tree. Most people, it's what they see. Or your eye might go to the lower left corner and go up right, or the upper right corner and go down. Generally, your eye doesn't go here first, though. Generally, your eye gradually goes there after it goes to whatever focal point it goes to first. On the left is a cattail. And notice it has in there kind of a snail-looking creature there on the cattail. And that's the focal point of the photo. Again, when you first look at this, your eye might go right to that, possibly. Or it might go to the bottom right area, or it might go to the top of that cattail and then come down and notice, oh, there's the snail there on the cattail. The one on the right, when you first look at this one, you might notice the door here first, or some students say they notice over here first and come over this way. Irregardless, wherever your eye focuses first, it gravitates towards that rule of third scenario for the most part. So again, rule of thirds is a very simple concept. Place a subject along the lines or near the intersecting points. For portraits, the eyes are often positioned along one of the horizontal lines, preferably near one of the power points to make the photograph more pleasing to look at and naturally draw the attention to the eyes. For landscape and the horizon is aligned generally to any of the horizon lines on the upper third or lower third you'll hear a lot this semester. So horizons are always upper third or lower thirds of that rule of thirds. And depending on how much water or how much sky you want to see in that setting. For post-processing of photos, I recommend this week, since we only have the take-home lab to do, this week you got some more stuff to do at home for us, for a class anyway. First is, if you could download Picasa, which is a free software to manage photos on your Mac or PC. It's going to help you manage your photos. You can do light photo manipulation like red eye reduction. But you'll also use it this semester to create your thumbnail printouts. You could use it also for your final presentation when you're compiling your pictures and video and music. It is made by Google. It is totally free. Very simple to use. So I recommend you to download that this week if you could on your Mac or PC and play with it a little bit. So now what we're going to do is I want you to kind of look around for a second. You're going to pick at least one other person. You've got to do at least one, possibly two people to go with tonight before you leave. And what you're going to do is you're going to, and I'll bring that back up here. You're going to take some photos of each other. But before you do that, you're going to go out of the room, maybe out in the parking lot, out in the foyer. Hope it'll still a little light out. Practice taking at least 10 photos apiece. So if you have two people in your group, you and somebody else, you're going to take 10 photos of that person. And then they're going to choose out of those 10 photos one of those photos they like the best. You're going to delete the rest of them. And like I suggested at the first of class, if you have a camera phone, take their picture with your camera phone and text it to yourself and put their name in the text so you'll know their name. Because when you upload this to Folky for week 1, or week 2, I'm sorry, I want you to put their name in the label for that image if you could. And let's just do this for their name. Let's just put their last name up there on Folky. It's all I need you to put is their last name. You don't need to put the first name. And you'll submit done. I already have everybody's Folky link by now, so you don't need to put down here your URL to Folky. I can go there myself. And so all you need to message below here is the word done, and then submit it. And that's it. Questions? All right, so again, you need at least to have at least one more person besides yourself in your group. You have up to 2 besides yourself. So go forth and take photos. If you have any questions about anything, come and see me. Otherwise, see everybody next week. And if you have any